Hello YouTube, Dave here, and today I'm going to be giving you my early impressions of 13th Age. So this is a system that I've heard about quite a bit over the years, and I've never actually owned it. I've never even seen it in stores anywhere in my area. It's not something that I particularly sought out, but recently this was at my local game store, and I decided to, why not? Just sort of take the plunge and give it a pickup. So the 13th Age system basically is sort of like this updated version. A lot of people say it's sort of an updated or a streamlined version of D&D 4th edition. There were writers, so Rob Heinso, I hope I'm saying that right, and Jonathan Tweet. They have worked on D&D's 3rd edition and 4th edition respectively, so they have some experience with both of those versions of the Dungeons & Dragons game. And this system is basically them coming together with a few others and making something sort of their own. But anytime I released a 4th edition D&D video in the past, or a video that sort of mentions or discusses a little bit about 4th edition, one of the comments that seems to pop up on pretty much all those videos was that I should try 13th Age. And a lot of people say, well, 13th Age is the system that does, 4th edition does it right. And I don't know how I feel about that, because I do like the way that 4th edition D&D was to begin with. But it is interesting to, give this a look. Another interesting thing about this is an older system than I really thought. Even though I didn't start my YouTube channel until 5th edition came out, but I always kind of had this thing in my mind where 13th Age was something that was done just within the last few years. This actually came out in 2013. Now, again, people who are familiar with the system obviously already know that, but it's something that, it came out between the time that 4th edition D&D was, quietly discontinued, and the D&D next playtest was in full swing. Like 5th edition came out in 2014. So this is sort of right in that middle period where like the last 4th edition stuff was released in 2012, and then there was sort of the gap where they were doing playtest stuff, and then 5th edition came out. So this was sort of right in the middle there. So that's something that was kind of interesting, at least for me, because I really didn't think this was as old as it was. Like I really thought this was something that came out after 5e's release and within the last, say 5 years or so. But anyway, just sort of an interesting note. So this was released by, Pelgrane Press, and the retail price was $49.95 US. I forget what the Canadian price was that I paid for it. I think it was 50. I think it was like 55, if I can recall correctly. Now again, like I said, this isn't going to be a comprehensive review. This is just going to be sort of my early impressions, but I want to talk about this a little bit. Inside the covers, we do have the maps for the campaign setting in which this RPG takes place. So we got the Dragon Empire, and I believe it's the same on the front and back. Okay, yeah. So the front cover, like the front inside cover, has the map, and the back inside cover has the map as well. Something else I was really impressed with is just the quality of the paper. Like this is a nice glossy pages for the book. The cover itself also feels really nice. So I'm a sucker for really well-made books. If you recall my video on the Vossen RPG, that was one that I also was really impressed by, just the quality overall of the book, the materials and everything. And so this wasn't like the thicker pages like in that one, but it's got like these nice glossy pages that I always really like. So really cool stuff there. We have our table of contents, and then we sort of get into some of the really interesting information about this. The first thing we have, of course, is the introduction. And the introduction, again, it gives you some cool stuff like information on starting 13th Age, role-playing versus, physical dice role-playing, character chapter introduction, so it gives you some of the basic stuff about character creation, and then some of the just design notes that sort of went into it. So it says, designers, so the designers worked on 3E and 4E. How does this compare? So it sort of talks a little bit about their system. And one of the things that I do actually appreciate is that they did state here that, 4th edition did take the D&D game forward in terms of things like, balance, like a player character class balance and gameplay balance. and that's something that sort of got picked up by fifth edition. So it's just nice to see, the fact that they're not just taking shots at 4E because that was the popular thing to do, especially, in 2013. So I really do kind of like that. It's just one of those things, as someone who just finds edition wars to be completely and totally ridiculous and pointless, personally. I was really just kind of happy to see that, because usually if someone releases something that's sort of the better version, as a lot of people call it, it's usually, there's a lot of shots taken, even if they're kind of thinly veiled. So it's nice to see that, they were civil, and even praise, fourth edition for one of the things that it was really known for, which was that player character balance. Anyway, the next section here is all about icons. So in this particular RPG, there are, 12 icons that you have total? So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13. Sorry, there's 13 icons, it looks like. And so these are sort of like your major figures within the campaign world. But one of the cool things about them is the fact that they are essentially very generic. So it gives you some information about them, like we have the Archmage. It gives sort of their usual location, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's their main location. There's a quote for them, common knowledge about them, adventures, allies, enemies, a little bit of history. But again, it's all very archetypal, and it's something that is open for letting you sort of tailor it to your own game. So that's kind of cool. And then it gives like the true danger. So the true danger sort of is like I think the big thing that threatens the particular icon. So the true danger for the Archmage, for example, says everything will be all right provided that no catastrophe brings down the Archmage's power nodes and plunges the Empire into a maelstrom of rampant elementals, natural forces, monsters from the Iron Sea, and demons from the Abyss. So again, really, really cool stuff there. So we got the Archmage, we have the Crusader, which is sort of like your paladin warrior that started with good intentions, but kind of lost themselves in the cause to the point where they've sort of been a little bit corrupted, though again, not necessarily evil. You have the Diabolist or Diabolist, and this like your Tiefling Queen, or they're basically someone that can summon demons and stuff like that. And you have your Dwarf King, so again, very, very typical stuff. Elf Queen, we have the Human Emperor, the Great Gold Worm, the High Druid, and let's get the page here. The Lich King, and the Orc Lord, the Priestess, and the Prince of Shadows. So the Archmage is sort of someone that could be like a patron of wizards. Then we have the Priestess for like your clerics, the Prince of Shadows for sort of like your rogues, and then we have the three. So these are like very powerful dragons. So really cool stuff. And it gives their alignment information. And as you can see, some of them sort of overlap in different locations because they may have sort of slightly different alignments depending. So one of the cool things about this particular game that I've seen so far is that the characters actually have active relationships with the different icons, and essentially each I think it's each session. It's either each session or each adventure. I think it's each like gameplay session though. You can roll d6s, and if any of your dice come up as like a 6, so you roll a d6 for each of the icons that you have some sort of relationship with, I believe. And if any of them come up with a 6, then they can come and aid you in some way. If you roll a 5, then they can sort of come in and help you, or there's your attachment to them can be beneficial, but there may be some sort of catch. So there's just some really cool things that you can sort of do with that. And then we also have another really interesting thing about this. So this system also has every character has something like one unique thing about them. So there are some examples here. Let's just see if I can find them. Yeah, so we got some here. And it sort of falls under different types, but you can literally choose just about anything. They do recommend and they do sort of advise that if you're going to choose like your one unique thing, you have to sort of you want to do something that's kind of interesting, right? Like you don't want to say like my one unique thing is that I have a necklace of fireballs or something like that. Now, I guess that would technically mean that nobody else in the campaign world has one, but it's a little underwhelming. So, for example, they have one here that's like seemingly innocuous, which says that I'm the only elf in the world with human ears. And that's sort of interesting. Again, it's something that's not mechanically overpowering, but it could create some interesting role-playing situations. There's ones for players creating the story. So one of them here says, I'm the only human child of a zombie mother. So again, that's sort of an interesting thing that you can sort of create stories with. There's an example of one that's a cool idea, but you'll suffer consequences later. So one of them just says, I have a clockwork heart made by the Dwarves. So they sort of have like Jean-Luc Picard's artificial heart. So, you know, you could have a situation where maybe at some point that construct gets damaged and they have to try to find a way to replace it. So that could be the consequences later. It's just, again, it's just a really cool system. So, you know, again, you just sort of choose your one unique thing. And I don't know, I really like that. And it's something that sort of makes you think about your character. And it is important for the game master to work with the players on their one unique thing, to try to steer them away from, again, something frivolous, like, you know, instead of saying you know, my one unique thing is that I have, you know, a magic sword. It could be that, you know, if you wanted to have a magic sword starting off, you could have it be that, like, you're the only one in your family that can utilize the sword, or that the sword is connected specifically to your family. So if anyone else were to pick up that weapon, it would just be an ordinary weapon for them. But again, you want to try something a little bit different. And again, it gives you some examples of some ones that you should probably stay away from. Like if you're making a first level character, to say that you're a dragon rider might be a little bit much, which it says here, too much for first level. And then there's ones like, you know, deliberately pushing it, where the example is, I'm the only elf or dwarf person in the world who can fly. So, you know, again, there's just some interesting things about that. But I think it also gives you some ideas how you can, you know, work with that as well. So even if they come up with something strange or potentially troublesome, there may be a way to make it work. So it's just, you know, again, it's an interesting thing. But again, a very collaborative thing, I think, between the game master and the players. And I think that's a big thing with this system as well, is that there's a lot of player agency in it, because again, their relationships with the different icons as they roll, like their relationship die at the beginning of the game, you know, can affect things. You could sort of help, they can help sort of build the world sort of around them through their actions. And one of the things I think I read in here is that, you know, you can run sort of the same campaign setting multiple times, but have it feel, you know, vastly different each time. So I think that's just a really, you know, interesting way of doing things. So the relationship system, I haven't read it in full detail yet, but it is something I will definitely go into further detail on when I do the full review. So again, just some really, really cool stuff here. Another interesting thing about this system is that there's not a specific like skill system the way that we sort of think of it, either from 3rd edition or 4th edition or even into 5th edition now, where you have, like, you know, skill points or proficiencies that you gain. You actually have essentially like background information. Like you just basically decide what your background was, what different things that you've done before you became like an adventuring character or hero. And you can sort of use those backgrounds to try to give you essentially like bonuses to your to skill rolls when a situation may come up. So yeah, it's kind of tough to explain, and I haven't read it in full detail yet. So I don't want to go too much into it, but you essentially like can put different points. You can put points, like multiple points, into a single background, and I want to say that each point that you put in there gives you an extra bonus on your rolls. So it's just, again, it's a really interesting system, and it creates, like, you know, it makes your backgrounds feel a little bit more important because you use those to sort of build your skill proficiencies and stuff around. Again, just really kind of interesting. Like I said, this is very, very early impressions. If this isn't a full review or anything yet. So up next we have our feats. So we have general feats, we have racial feats, and I don't think we've actually gotten to the races or the classes yet. But then each class also has several feats that can sort of affect their class features. And this actually strangely reminds me a little bit of something like Pathfinder 2nd Edition, where you have these feats that sort of help build your character and customize your character. And it looks like we're getting a little bit of that here as well. So again, sort of an interesting thing to have in the game. Again, I don't know a ton about it yet, I need to, like I said, read up a little bit more and check out a few more things about it. But it's just, like I said, sort of an interesting take on the character creation system. So here we have like weapons, general goods, just all kinds of interesting stuff there. Advice for players. And now we're going to get into the actual player character stuff here. So we have our basic races. In this one, we have the major races up first. So you have human, dwarf, dark elf, high elf, wood elf, gnome, half elf, half orc, and halfling. And each of these races will give you a bonus to one of your ability scores. It uses the same ability scores as the third 3.0. Basically, as D&D has for a long time. So you still have like your strength, dex, con, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Humans can put +2 into any attribute, and then they get a bonus feat. But each race also gets a racial power. So the humans get this thing called Quick to Fight, which is their basic racial power. It says at the start of each battle, roll initiative twice and choose the result that you want. Later on, when they reach what's called the champion tier, so I think there's like adventure tier, champion tier, and epic tier, and those are, excuse me, choked on nothing there. And those are basically the same thing that we have as like different tiers of adventuring in 4th edition. But there is one big difference that had me a little confused at first. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. But the champion version of this says if you roll a natural 19 or 20 for initiative, increase the escalation die by 1, which usually starts at 0 since the beginning of combat. The escalation die I'll talk about a little bit in a moment, but again, sort of an interesting system. So you got your humans, and again, there's very little like description necessary for them. Dwarves, they can choose either +2 to con or +2 to wisdom. I like their racial power. I'm not going to go through every racial power, but I do like this one, and that says that's your best shot. So it says once per battle is a free action. After you've been hit by an enemy attack, you can heal using a recovery. So recovery is kind of like, I think like a hit die in 5th edition or a healing surge in 4th edition. So you can roll using a recovery. If the escalation die, so there that comes up again, is less than 2, you only get half the usual healing from the recovery. Unlike other recoveries that might allow you to take an average result, you have to roll this one. Note that you can't use this ability if the attack drops you to below 0 hit points, because you've got to be on your feet to sneer at their attack and recover. And then later on, the champion feat is if the escalation die is 2 or more. When you use that's your best shot, the recovery is free, so you don't actually have to spend one of your recoveries that you get. So again, really cool stuff. We got our half orcs. We have the 3 different types of elves. So we have dark elves, high elves, and wood elves. And again, they have a very interesting relationship because they all sort of follow the elf queen, but they have different sort of interpretations, if I recall. Basically of how they do things here. Then we have our gnomes and half-elves. So half-elves have a very interesting ability. So their racial power is once per battle, subtract 1 from the natural result of one of your own d20 rolls, and when they reach the champion tier, you gain additional use of surprising each battle, but you can only use it to affect a nearby ally's d20 roll. So reducing a die roll sounds really weird, right? And that was something that it took me a moment. I just sort of looked at it. It does actually have a little blurb here in this as well. It doesn't actually explain why it's useful in this blurb. It does actually sort of steer you towards looking stuff up, which I think is neat. I think that's kind of a cool thing. But there's a lot of abilities in this system that can have better, or like they can have different effects depending on if the die roll is like naturally an even number or naturally an odd number. So if like, naturally even number, so if you roll like, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, like, and so on a d20. And then the other ones, you roll like 3, 5, 7, 9, and so on. So if you want to trigger one of those abilities, but you rolled an even number, you can actually use the surprising to subtract 1 from that, which would take it from whether it was even or odd, and then turns it to the other one so that you may be able to trigger your power. So it's actually something that's kind of neat. There's not a ton of class features that I've really noticed so far that use it, but there's enough that it might be worth taking. And it does sort of specify that, it works really well with like a ranger, a sorcerer, or like a fighter, and even or a bard even. So like it gives examples of things and says half elves usually like to take those particular classes. So really cool stuff. And then we have some optional PC races that you can sort of decide on. You have like Draconic, or sort of like the Dragonborn, or they call the Dragonspawn here. You have the Aasimar, the Holy Ones. You have the Forgeborn, Dwarf Forged. So that's kind of interesting. So they're sort of like a mechanical construct type of thing. And then you have the Demon Touch, or the Tieflings. So again, really cool stuff. So here's one of the first things that definitely kind of made me like puzzled for a little bit. We have our class information here. So we get to the Barbarian, for example, and there's only 10 levels of progression. So at first I was worried that maybe this was like just, I don't want to say like a preview book or anything, but like maybe it was one of those things where, there were different levels, like a different supplement would have more in terms of level progression and stuff. I don't think that's the case though. It just seems to be like a 10 level progression system. So you've got like your different tiers. And I think, what is it? Like you're an adventurer. I think you're an adventurer from like first to, I want to say it's like third level, or fifth level. So you're an adventurer tier until fifth level, and then sixth through seventh level, or sorry, yeah, so it's level 6 and 7, you're in the champion tier, and then when you reach level 8, you get into the epic tier. So it seems like progression might be a little bit slower in this system. That's one thing I haven't really read yet, but it is sort of interesting. And here we have our class information. So Barbarian stats, no, sorry, here's what we want. So you get your hit points for the Barbarian is 7, plus your con modifier, and then it starts off at ×3. So again, you're getting that more pool of hit points at first level, which is again very like 4th edition, and something that I wish they would have stuck with. If you look at the way that D&D 5th edition does their first 3 levels, they should just really all be combined into one, because they get you to 3rd level so quick that there's almost no point in going through 1st or 2nd level. So this one here, they give you like your hit point range, and then it's just times a number. And it gets up to like ×24 at level 10, which is pretty interesting. And yeah, so you get some really cool stuff here. And then we got our damage bonus, class talents. So again, you sort of choose your class talents, and I believe those come from the right here. And you can also take feats to augment some of your abilities as well. So again, just really, really cool stuff. But yeah, the level 10 thing really sort of caught me by surprise. And I think that's simply because of the fact that, like, really, I'm sort of used, like, 4th edition D&D had a 30 level progression. And so they actually added 10 levels to the standard progression that we've had in Dungeons & Dragons, like, for example, for forever. At least from, like, the base rules from the Player's Handbook, which, I think 2nd edition was the first one that really stuck to 20 levels. Anyway, it's just so when I saw this, there was only 10 levels of progression, so it felt like a bit of an overcorrection. But again, it's sort of done in an interesting way. So yeah, it'll be really cool to dive a little bit deeper into the character stuff and to sort of see how some of that works. So your spellcasters, they'll have their spells in here as well. And again, one of the things that I like about this is that their spell level is equal to the same level that they gain the spells at. So they get, 1st level spells, obviously, then the next one they would get is 3rd level spells, which in D&D, with the exception of 4th edition, which did actually number the abilities based off of the level that you were when you got them, versus like a 3rd level character has 2nd level spells, sort of thing, which is always just weird in my opinion. So I like the way that they handled that. I think that was done pretty well. Then we got our fighter, and again, very, very basic stuff for the fighter. And I think the different classes also affect attacks, like weapon damage. I could be wrong on that. I'll have to check that out and sort of see, because that's one thing that I haven't really gotten to yet. I've just sort of looked at some of the bare bones basic stuff. I've had this book for a little bit, but there's just been a lot of other stuff going on, so I haven't been able to spend a lot of time with it. But nonetheless, like I said, there's some really cool stuff in here that I do find very interesting. So we only have our like different spells as well, and then we've got some more stuff. Combat. So when it comes to combat, the one thing that I want to talk about in combat right now is the fact that the system has what's called an escalation die. And I mentioned that a couple times before, and there are abilities that sort of depend on that. So what the escalation die is basically is, I think it's like a six-sided die. Like I think it's specifically a D6 that you put on the table. Again, it could be a D10. I forget, but you start off with an escalation die of 0 on round 1. At the start of each round after that, you add 1 to the escalation die. So on round 2, the escalation die will start off at 1, unless you have that ability where you can actually start the escalation die 1 higher than it normally might. And what that does is it gives you bonuses. I think it's to attacks. It might be attacks and damage, but I think it's just attacks. But whatever the number of the escalation die is a bonus that you get to attacks and perhaps a few other things every round. So I think that's really cool. So if the die gets up to like 5 or 6, then you're adding 5 or 6 to each of your rolls. And I think that's sort of done to help speed up the pace of combat, because that was one of the criticisms about 4th edition D&D, is that combat could take a long time. And that's not wrong. Like, it's definitely not wrong. I never had like marathon combats where like an entire session was just one fight. But I could see how like that might be a situation that could be a problem. And typically the player characters are the only ones that use the escalation die. However, there are a few creatures or a few monsters that can actually use it as well, depending on how things go. So in looking at the monster section, this is sort of the last thing I want to talk about today, because like I said, I haven't had a chance to look at too much. I've just sort of skimmed some of it here. But the enemy stat blocks are very simple and very interesting. So here's your stat block for like the Boule. AC 22, physical defense of 19, magic defense of 14. So it takes away like the fortitude, reflex, and will defenses that we had in 4th edition, and instead just has armor class, physical, and then magical. So armor class is obviously for weapons. Physical might be things like like poison or attacks that just have to interact with the body. They don't necessarily need to penetrate armor to be effective. And then you have your magic defense, which again is pretty self-explanatory kind of thing. So again, really cool stuff, but again, very small stat block. Hit points 170, so the enemy hit points do kind of scale with the players. And then they have a few different abilities here. We've also got some demons, which is really cool. Now, the demon that I really like is the, when we get to it here, is the Balor. So we got the flame demon here. So they're nasty. So they're actually with the 13th level, which the player characters can only get up to 10th level. So they're more powerful than any singular player character could be. The only thing that might challenge them would be one of the like the icons, like the the Archmage or the Lich King or the Orc King or stuff like that. But again, you can sort of see some stuff here. So with their Abyssal Blade, it's plus 18 to hit versus armor class, and it does 160 damage on a hit. So your damage numbers are just set. You don't have to roll dice. So for a GM, it's very streamlined because you're not rolling as many dice. Like, you're rolling for attack, but when the damage comes, it's just fixed values, which some people like, some people don't like. I know 5th edition has a lot of fixed values that you can use. I typically don't, although I think Adventures League you're supposed to. But I don't run Adventures League, so I don't have to care about that. But I do kind of like, for this system, I think it works really well. And then if it's a natural even, so if you roll the die and it's naturally an even number, so 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on, you get to add plus 1d20 lightning damage to the target and to one other nearby enemy of the Balor's choice. So again, really cool stuff. I also think in this system, if I recall correctly, when you get into combat, exact distances like aren't as important. They're sort of like just general range categories. So nearby, obviously being one of them. I think there's engaged, nearby, and then maybe long range, I think, are the different ones. Now, one thing that's interesting about this guy in particular is he's got the Desperate Escalator. So when he's staggered, and staggered is the 13th Age version of Bloodied in 4th edition, which means you're at your half your hit points or below. It says here, if they're staggered, they actually add the Escalation Die to their attack rolls. So some creatures do get to do that, which is kind of neat. And that's really sort of as far as I've made it so far. I haven't really been able to, or haven't really gotten to reading a lot of the campaign setting stuff, although from my understanding of it, again, a lot of it is sort of very, it's undefined in such a way that you can have it be basically anything that you want it to be. Which is cool. There's a few locations that you get some information on, typically where you may find the different icons, which I think is cool. We got some magic items and stuff. And then there is actually an adventure built into this system as well, or into this book, which might be kind of fun to try out one of these days. I might make up some pre-generated characters and maybe try to run a one-shot or just run through the adventure scenario in the book, which would be kind of cool. And just the last thing I guess I'll end on here is just the character sheet, which is interesting. So we've got your name and class, race, level. Again, very simple character sheet here. You've got hit points, so you have your maximum hit points, what they are now. You've got your recoveries and what your recovery roll would be. So a number that you can put in front of the letter D, and then whatever the size of the recovery die would be for you, plus any modifiers. You've got your attacks, so you got melee and ranged attacks. Then you've got, if what they do on a hit, and certain things will also do damage on a miss, so you don't necessarily do absolutely nothing in the event of a missed roll. So there are some abilities that will still deal damage on a miss, and I don't know if weapon attacks fall into that generally. Again, very early first impression video. If you guys know that, actually, feel free to fill in any of the gaps that I have in terms of my limited knowledge of the system, only having really looked through it a couple of times and sort of focusing on sort of some specific elements of it here. We got our one unique thing. We have our icon relationships. We have our backgrounds, and then we got our talents, feats, class features, incremental advances. So that's sort of like your, I think that's sort of like your leveling system. I want to say is like when you level up, again, I don't fully know how this works, so I don't want to go too deep into it. But you get, I think at the ends of adventures or sessions, you get incremental advances that you can put into things, I guess. And then you've got up here, you got your attributes, and then you have your modifiers. So there's base number, modifier, and then modifier plus level, which comes in really handy. So one thing, again, that I do like about this is that you're not going to be, like for a character sheet of this, for this RPG, it doesn't seem like you're going to be erasing a ton of stuff, like from leveling up characters in, Pathfinder, D&D, some other systems. There's a lot of times where you're erasing a ton of stuff on your character sheets. And 4th edition was the same way because you were adding half your level to just about everything. So there was a lot of erasing to be done. This is like the one thing I think is going to get sort of erased or filled in the most, other than like hit points, recoveries, and then maybe some, armor class or weapon information. But again, overall, really cool stuff. So this is a system that I am very interested in. I do regret that it took me this long to get into it because there's probably not going to be a lot of opportunities for me to pick up other stuff for it. I know that there is basically like a core rulebook 2 that came out, and I forget the name of it. It was like 13 something, not the 13th age, but there was like 13 and then another word that came after it. But it was basically has like new character classes, and this book has sort of like demons in it, so the other one had devils to sort of work with, and I think there's some adventure books and stuff too. So this might be the only book that I get for this system, but for my first impression, I am really impressed. I wouldn't go so far as to say that this, fixes 4th edition, because I know a lot of people have sort of said that. I think it's its own thing, and it's borrowed elements from 4th edition, but you've got a lot of differences between this and 4E. Now, I think both are perfectly fine, and I think both are worth like checking out and having an open mind while checking it out. And I've heard people say that actually like 4th edition D&D is sort of going through a little bit of a renaissance in the fact that more people are sort of just like looking at it for what it is and not for what they thought it was, or the anger that they had due to the timing, due to the change in terminology, stuff like that. So I don't know. I think both are perfectly fine. but I am very interested in this. So in the next month or so, I'll spend some time reading through it, and then I will have a full and proper review. This is just sort of my first impression, some of the things that I've noticed or that really caught my attention when I was going through it. So like the way that they handle races, the one unique thing about each of the characters. I do need to look up a little bit more about backgrounds because I haven't really gotten into that. But the thing with the backgrounds is, I guess one last thing to talk about is that the backgrounds can be basically anything that you want it to be. It's not like a set list that you choose from. You just come up with something, and then again, if a skill roll has to be made, you may have a way of sort of trying to justify having bonuses to it based off of your background. And as long as you can make a convincing case, then the GM should let you do that. So I think that's kind of cool. The character class system, again, 10 levels of progression, seems really short, but again, I think they handle leveling a bit differently. So that's something that I'll have to look into, and the 10 level system might be just perfectly fine. To me right now, without really understanding the experience system and how you go from level to level, it does feel like a bit of an overcorrection from the 4th edition 30 level progression, but I suspect I'm completely and totally wrong on that, and I feel like those 10 levels are something that's still going to take a long time to get through, and I hope that's the case, because I am a little bit, I don't want to say burnt out, but I feel that nowadays, the emphasis is on leveling your characters and constantly getting new abilities versus, spending longer periods of time just, going through stories and stuff like that. So we'll sort of see how that turns out, but I do find it interesting so far. I love the way that monsters are done. They're very simple, they're very easy. Like, you can put their information very easily on an index card, which is great for people like me who still like to write stuff out, or people like me that doesn't have a functioning printer right now. But yeah, really impressed with it so far. I think it's a really great system. I definitely see influences from different editions of D&D, particularly 3rd and especially 4th. And yeah, I'm interested to learn more about it. So if any of you have actually played or run or just can help me fill in some of the gaps in my knowledge of this so far on 13th Age, don't hesitate to let me know in the comments below. Just keep everything again nice and respectful, because this is something that I've literally only spent like maybe an hour going through total since I picked it up. So there's a lot that I still need to learn, obviously, about this system, but I am very intrigued by it, and I definitely want to put the time in to learn more about it. And this is something that I do, like I said, see myself wanting to run at some point, even if it's just for like a one-shot or something. I think it would be kind of fun to try. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all next time. Take care.